1,600 people under surveillance, as from MI5. If Britain is to temper Islamist extremism, then the radicalisation must be stopped.
Allah ordered you to punish the kuffar. If they become enemy, you punish them, and you humiliate them, and you be happy with that.
A deepening pool of Islamist recruits view the non-believers or kafar as legitimate targets, even on home soil.
But what role are you going to play? That's what you need to ask yourself. Are you going to be one of those people who watch and the Mujahideen play, fulfilling that you sit back and watch? And you sit back and watch? No, my dear Muslim brothers, you need to play an active role. Why?
Newsnight investigates the hands behind the scenes, moulding anger and resentment to create a British jihad. A growing cadre of terrorist sympathisers and extremists are posing the biggest threat to national security since the IRA. Their groups are both well organised and secretive. We've investigated the hidden story of radicalisation in Britain today and can reveal alarming new evidence about how a minority of young British Muslims are being sucked into a life of hatred and extremism. There's a secret war being conducted against extremism deep in the English countryside. Not by the police or the intelligence services, but by a network of former spies, hackers and amateur detectives who are spending thousands of hours tracking radicals on the internet. Working from the small airman is gathering evidence to be passed.
These sites are very significant in radicalising these young Muslims. They actually glorify bin Laden. They glorify suicide bombers. They're an education tool to brainwash young Muslims. This is how it starts.
He works with a private group called Vigil. Glenn Genvy is using a false identity tonight to gain access to an Islamist chat room run by Sheikh Omar Bakri Mohammed, who's been radicalising young British Muslims for 20 years. His group, Al Muhajirun, is now a proscribed organisation, and Bakri Mohammed is no longer allowed back into the country. The Home Secretary excluded him after the London bombings last year. But that hasn't stopped him from preaching.
We found a cyber mosque run by Omar Bakri Mohammed from Lebanon, speaking to British Muslims in the UK, organising demonstrations, hate speeches, incitement to terror, calling on them to take up arms against British and American troops.
So where society had thought that Bakri Mohammed was off the scene, you've discovered he's still active?
He's active, but he's back in the UK in a cyber sense.
And many people did not fulfill this.
Omar Bakri Mohammed has just come online using one of his false identities. We've confirmed with a voice recognition expert that this is actually Bakri Mohammed speaking. We've also listened back to his past lectures from the archive, and it's clear he's been teaching extremism and intolerance, here reserving praise for the London bombers.
How we can condemn those great men? It's not something to feel shame about it. It's not something bad, it's something so good.
And then there's a eulogy for Abu Musa Zakari, the brutal former Al-Qaeda leader in Iraq.
May Allah smile in the face of Abu Mus'ab al-Zarqawi. And when you meet the enemy, strike their own neck. He revived the sunnah of removing the head of the enemy. He revived the sunnah of slaughtering the enemy. We saw him and his brothers how they removed the head of the enemy by their own sword.
But perhaps the most shocking is the reaction to the suggestion from another undercover investigator who'd infiltrated the site that Dublin Airport should be a legitimate target for attack because US forces were flying through on their way to Iraq.
Airports like in Dublin, where Kuffar American forces fly via to reach Iraq to kill our brothers, should be part of the battlefield, the airport. Your question, it is hit the target. It is very hard, and that issues must be understood.
Each night, Omar Bakri Mohammed's inspirational talks take place in an open internet chat room. That's the idea, to entice new members in to hear radical and extremist viewpoints which would otherwise be shunned in mosques up and down the country. But we found out that this open website contains links to a far more secretive, password-protected website, and we've discovered that plays a crucial role in the organisation. Glengenvie used a false identity to gain access to this password-protected members-only website. 2 weeks ago, he noticed this message calling for a demonstration outside the Old Bailey. Headlined Mohammed on trial, it called for a protest against the prosecution of an Islamist radical. Sure enough, the following day, the radicals turned up and there was a violent struggle with the police outside the court. They were protesting against the trial of a 23-year-old British Muslim facing a charge of incitement to murder, arrested at the demonstration against the Danish newspaper cartoons of Mohammed. But the advert for the Old Bailey demonstration was not the only lead we followed up. A female member, calling herself Terror, Mother of Terror, posted this notice about a debate at Staffordshire University between the Bible and the Quran. Given recent statements from the government about radicalisation on university campuses, we decided to follow it up. We sent an undercover researcher to the meeting in Stoke-on-Trent who found that it was addressed by a known radical from Luton, a man who has preached that Al-Qaeda is Islamically justified. Staffordshire University had no idea of the background of this speaker. They declined to be interviewed, but said that although no extremist views were expressed at the meeting,
the university is obviously concerned to learn of reports that this debate was advertised on an extremist website and attended by a known extremist, and this is subject to investigation.
Sheikh Musa Abmani knows more about how radicals target universities than anyone in the country. In 2002, he was appointed Imam and Muslim chaplain for London Metropolitan University, and for the past 4 years, he's waged a battle against the extremists.
They have long experience of subversion, creating mayhem, upsetting the normality of student life. So you had to really study and see their ways, and knowing that there will be violence.
Musa Abmani found that the Islamic Society, like many across the country at the time, were dominated by radicals linked to Al-Muhajirun and Hizb ut-Tahrir, another Islamist group which campaigns for a global Islamic state. The ISOC would bring in their own guest speakers.
The centrality of it is the control of Friday prayers. If they have control of Friday prayers, then they have the community on hold. They would abuse this tradition to pass the message of khilafah, of hatred, continuously. It will be about jihad, about fighting, about war, Afghanistan.
He created a new rule. All preachers had to be Islamically qualified and approved by the university. This meant that extremist speakers were excluded, but this put him on a collision course with the radicals. Things got very nasty indeed when he received an unexpected visit from a student.
I said, "Are you the imam?" I said, "Yes." "How are you?" Very politely. I said, "Yes. I just came to inform you something." And I said, "Oh, let's come inside." I said, "Yes. Forming pledge. I'm going to kill you."
To kill you?
Yes.
The university imam took action to avoid the men, but the threats made him realise just how ingrained extremism was in the university system. He submitted a detailed plan to the Home Office in 2003 to create a body of moderate imams to go out into universities and take on the radicals, but it was ignored.
I was invited to meet the Minister of Education and the Home Office Minister then, 3 years ago, and they took my report and very politely and thanked me, and that was the end of the story. Never had anything from them since.
Nothing?
No.
While the government sat on its hands, Musa Abmani was getting more and more direct evidence of radicalisation. At his local mosque, he met who'd been drawn in the Islamist group to here.
I was advised not to mix and not to discuss things with people who are non-practicing, even within the Muslims. And then also other faith communities and the UK wider society, they were labelled as kuffar and infidels as well. They always promoted hatred, yes. They promoted hatred, they promoted hostility towards, the wider UK society.
Hizb ut-Tahrir a squeaky clean image to the outside world, but during the course of this investigation, we've heard about serious allegations of much more sinister behaviour. Is rising and